Okay, good. So I was going to recap what Pavra has just recapped there, so I won't recap again, but just moving on then to the fourth Samgrahavastus, and Happy New Year, by the way, I should say. Let's hope 2022 is better again than 2021. Anyway, so what I'm here to talk about this morning is Samanartha, the fourth Samgrahavastus. And I'll begin by just looking at the word itself, so Samanartha. So there's Saman, there's Artha, and there's Ta. Yeah, and I think looking at these words can give us a flavor of what we're trying to talk about, because in a way, I think exemplification is probably the most difficult one of the Samgrahavastus to talk about. So Saman, it literally translates as equalness, sameness. And here you could see it as your actions are equal to your aspirations and your ideals. So S-A-M-A-N. I'm going to leave out the diacritics on the Sanskrit. And then Artha, we've already heard a bit about Artha 2 days ago from Jnanadhara. You could say here, it's the same word as Arthacharya for beneficial activity, which Jnanadhara talked about. So it can mean, it's a very, very rich word. It can mean goal, aim, object, benefit, good, what's for your welfare, and so on. There's so many words that it can mean. And then Ta just means ness, like roundness, you know? So it just has that quality. So you could say Samanartha means kind of the same goal or equal benefit. And you could, you know, that doesn't really necessarily tell us much, equal benefit. So what sense are we meaning this? And Ratnaprabha, who's a bit of a scholar in our community, talks about this in 3 ways. He says we can think of it in terms of, excuse me, we can think of it in terms of an even-handedness, an attitude of equality to all, treating everyone the same way. That's the first kind of way we can translate Samanartha. We can think of it also, it kind of translates as empathy and harmony, because we all ultimately share the same goal. Empathy and harmony, because we all ultimately share the same goal. So we feel an equal empathy with every person. And I'll come back to that a bit later, that one. And then third one, and this is the one that we're more familiar with. This is the one that Bhante talks about in his lecture. He uses this translation from the Vimalakirti Thurman's translation as exemplification. So you make your goal and your actions equal. So you make your goal and your actions equal. You practice what you aspire to. You live out what you aspire to. So it's mainly in that sense of the word that we tend to use exemplification in our community. It's Samanartha rather in our community, in the sense of exemplification. So I'm going to spend most of the talk then talking about that sense of the term, exemplification. And what better place to start than with the Buddha? Yeah, always good to bring out the Buddha in a talk on Buddhism. So the Buddha was the ultimate exemplar for us. He is the ultimate exemplar, I believe, for us of the Dharma life, basically. And one of the main things the Buddha exemplifies is the heroic ideal. The heroic ideal. He exemplifies this going forth from regular life to pursue the Dharma life, to pursue the spiritual life. And we've probably all heard the story of the Buddha leaving home, leaving wealth and status and riches to go and pursue the Dharma life really, really uncompromisingly and really, really fully. This is described in various texts and in various commentaries. One place it's gone into a bit is the Arya Pariyesana Sutta, which is all of my examples of the Buddha are from the Pali Canon today. So the Arya Pariyesana Sutta is the text on the noble quest. I forgot to look up where it is. I think it's the Majjhima Nikaya. But he says in this, I'll just read it very briefly. He says, I too, monks, before my awakening, when I was an unawakened bodhisattva, being myself subject to birth, sought what was likewise subject to birth. Being subject myself to aging, illness, death, sorrow, defilement, I sought happiness in what was likewise subject to illness, death, sorrow, defilement. So he's saying there that before he became enlightened, he used to look for happiness in worldly things which just couldn't provide happiness. And I'm sure we can all relate to that ourselves, yeah? So he asked himself, why do I do this? Why do I seek happiness in that which is not capable of giving happiness? Yeah. And he asked himself, well, what if I, being subject to all these things, were to seek instead the agingless, the illnessless, the deathless, the sorrowless, the unbinding, which is another word for enlightenment, you could say. So at a later time, this is the text again, while still young, a black-haired young man endowed with the blessings of youth in the first stage of life, and while my parents unwilling were crying with tears streaming down their faces, I shaved off my hair and beard, put on the ochre robe, and went forth from the home life into homelessness. So we probably all know the story of him, the Arya Pariyasana goes on to describe him meeting his two teachers that he had before enlightenment, finding their teachings insufficient and gaining enlightenment under the Bodhi tree. So that is the heroic quest of the Buddha that is really, it's a core example of how of what the Dharma life is about. And Bhante Sangharakshita talks about this heroic quest more in his book, Who is the Buddha? So I can really recommend that book, Who is the Buddha? And he really draws out the heroic ideal in the Buddha's life, as particularly as a template for us of how a Dharma life is exemplified. Yeah, to no longer seek happiness and well-being in the purely worldly, and instead go forth and practice the Dharma life really uncompromisingly. There's loads of other examples as well in the Buddha's life of where the Buddha exemplified something quite remarkable. So I want to give a couple more examples. So firstly, there's the Samanapala Sutta. So this is from the Dighi Nikaya. It's the second sutta of that text, of that collection. And the Samanapala Sutta means the text on the fruits of living as a homeless wanderer. Yeah, the text on the fruits of living as a homeless wanderer. And it's a very long text, so I'm only going to go into the opening of it. But it starts with King Ajatasattu in his court on a beautiful moonlit night. And he decides to visit a great spiritual teacher to bring peace to his troubled mind. And Ajatasattu, of course, has murdered his own father to claim the throne. So you can imagine how ill at ease he could be sitting with himself. And after much discussion about various sages and teachers available in the area, they settle on visiting the Buddha. And they literally saddle up 500 elephants, and they make their way into the jungle to where they have heard the Buddha is staying in a mango grove. And as they travel through the dark jungle, Ajatasattu, perhaps a manifestation of paranoia coming from his actions, is seized by terror of ambush or attack. And he even accuses his courtiers of betraying him and leading him into an ambush. But eventually they come to the grove where the Buddha sits. And the Buddha is sitting in this beautiful moonlit forest grove surrounded by 1,250 bhikkhus. And they're all sitting in complete silence, meditating through the night in the moonlight. And if you've ever been to India after the heat of the day, you know what a lovely thing the evenings and nights are, particularly lit by the moonlight. And the text says, King Ajatasattu then approached the Exalted One, the Buddha, and stood to one side. As he stood there surveying the company of bhikkhus, which sat in complete silence, as serene as a calm lake, he uttered the following joyful exclamation: "May my son, the Prince Udayabhadra, enjoy such peace as the company of bhikkhus now enjoys." So even before he speaks to the Buddha, or even before the Buddha speaks a word to him, or maybe even the Buddha sees him, the Buddha is exemplifying the sense of ease, the sense of peace, the sense of beauty of the Dharma life, which deeply affects the king. And he wishes this peace upon the most precious thing in his life, his son. And then another example is from the Udana. So we have what's called the Sundari Sutta. So the Buddha is staying, and his followers are staying in the Jettas Grove, which is another beautiful grove in the jungle, just outside the city of Sarvati. And he's been honored by his local followers. And there are some wanderers from other religious sects in the area, and they're jealous of the Buddha's popularity. And so they get one of their followers, to a woman called Sundari, who gives her name to the text, to visit the Buddha regularly. They instruct her to go and visit the Buddha regularly. And after this has happened a few times and people have noticed Sundari visiting the Buddha, they then have her killed. So it's quite Tarantino-esque, really, isn't it? You get these quite violent episodes sometimes in the Pali Canon, but they have her killed and they leave her body in a ditch surrounding the Jettas Grove. And then they go to the local king, Pasenadi, telling him they can't find one of their followers, Sundari. And upon examination, they say they suspect she's in the Jettas Grove because she has been seen regularly going there to visit the Buddha. And they find her body there, obviously. Then the king's men find her body. And everyone in the area accuses the Buddha and his followers of murder. And the local people then are outraged with the Buddha and his followers and insult and revile and harass them when they're going about their alms rounds. And the Buddha's followers come back to the Buddha and report this to the Buddha. And I'll just read out the text, the rest of the text. Sorry, no, what did I just do? Sorry, I just lost my spot. Yeah, I'll just read this out. So he says, the Buddha replies to them, he says, monks, this noise will not last long. It will only last 7 days. With the passing of 7 days, it will disappear. So in that case, when those people, on seeing you monks, insult, revile, irritate, and harass you with discourteous, abusive language, counter their accusation with this verse. He goes to suffering, the one who asserts what didn't take place, as does the one who, having done, says, I didn't. Both low-acting people, there become equal after death in the world beyond. So he's saying there that, you know, it's quite a serious karmic consequences to making false accusations or to denying doing what you did. So this is what the monks then say to people whenever they're reviled. They counter the accusation with that verse. And then after 7 days, the thought occurred to those people, this is from the text again, they're innocent, those Shakyan Sun contemplatives. It wasn't done by them. They're taking an oath, these Shakyan Sun contemplatives. And Shakyan Sun contemplatives are the way they're referring to the bhikkhus here. And to continue from the text, and so that noise didn't last long. It lasted only 7 days. With the passing of 7 days, it disappeared. Then a large number of monks went to the Blessed One, and on arrival, having bowed down to him, sat to one side. As they were sitting there, they said to him, it's amazing, Lord. It's astounding how well said that was by the Blessed One. Monks, that this noise would not last long. Lord, that noise has disappeared. And then, on realizing the significance of that, the Blessed One on that occasion exclaimed, they stab with their words people unrestrained, as they do with arrows an elephant got into battle. Hearing abusive words spoken, one should endure them, a monk with unbothered mind. So you could say there that, you know, the monks would have been within their rights to have a big argument with the people and furiously deny it and, you know, attack the people back. But what they did was they simply said the verse and continued on their way, not affected by the accusations, a monk with unbothered mind. And they exemplified something to such a degree with the Buddha's guidance that eventually the local people realized, no, it can't be them. So anyways, there are a few examples from the Pali Canon and from the Buddha in particular of the Buddha's exemplification. And in a way, that's why that's one of the reasons why the Buddha is so important and why we have the Buddha on the shrine. He represents a perfect life exemplified. But all that said, we are not the Buddha. Yeah, we don't have to exemplify enlightenment in our practice of it. In fact, what we're exemplifying is not perfection. Yeah, as we are not perfect. I'm assuming you are not perfect. Forgive me if you are. So exemplification doesn't mean putting on a show so people are inspired by us. Yeah. You don't go into Sangha night or on retreat and start pouring all your wisdom on top of people so that they are deeply impressed by you and you exemplify things for them. You're not trying to deliberately manufacture situations where you exemplify the perfect spiritual life lived out for other people. Instead, what we do is what we communicate, what we exemplify is our striving, yeah, our going for refuge, our giving ourselves to our practice. What you do for this Samgrahavastus of Samanartha is you practice what you preach. You put into practice what you aspire to. You live your Dharma life as fully as you can. Yeah, and that's what leads to exemplification. You're not required to exemplify deep and profound and irreversible insight, whatever that is. You're trying to exemplify that you're practicing the Dharma life at whatever level of practice that is. Yeah, you're on the path. You're being open with other people about your being on the path, and you're really openly and consciously and fully practicing. In his lecture on the Samgrahavastus, well, the lecture which includes the Samgrahavastus, Bhante Sangharakshita says, a bodhisattva practices what he preaches, except, of course, that he doesn't preach. A bodhisattva who is exemplifying is the living embodiment of all those qualities which he encourages in others. So he's the living embodiment of all those qualities which they encourage in others. And looking at it this way, anyone can be inspiring. Yeah, anyone can be inspiring. I find some of the most inspiring situations I'm in is often with beginners who, we're on a course together and they're talking about their struggles to get their meditation practice going and what they've done in their lives, sometimes in quite challenging situations, to get their meditation practice going. Or another favorite course of mine is the Not About Being Good course, which is an ethics course. And I find it really inspiring because after a few weeks, people start having all these really interesting ethical conundrums that are thrown up in their lives. And it's very, very inspiring to hear them talk about that and hear them, coming to their own realizations and deeper understandings about how ethics is a living practice in their lives. Very, very inspiring stuff, even if they're quite new to the Dharma, even if that's the first course in the Dharma they've done. And so we're practicing what we're preaching. Yeah, if you're talking about meditation, you don't have to sell yourself as this amazing meditator who gets into deep absorption all the time. We're simply offering ourselves as someone who is working on our minds, at times with successes, at times with struggles. Yeah, we're not so much in the center, I believe, communicating techniques. We're communicating a kind of an organic system of how to work on your mind in a real way and in a useful way. And of course, to speak about meditation, to exemplify engagement with meditation, you have to meditate. Yeah, so you have to be doing those things which you exemplify for others. And it's the same with ethics. So with exemplification and ethics, we're not exemplifying someone who is completely skillful all the time. We're exemplifying in some ways the struggle and the art of the struggle, and admitting shortfalls and confessing our shortcomings is actually one of the most inspiring things we can witness, actually. And as I mentioned on the first night of the retreat, I'm not long back from a 3-month retreat, well, a bit over 3 months, with where we're ordaining 18 men. There was 22 of us on the course. And some of the most inspiring parts of that retreat for me were being on the team in our chapter, where we would be confessing with each other our shortcomings. And this was on the team, so we're all, long enough in the tooth. We'd all been ordained for quite a number of years. But even still, you're just confessing, yeah, I got really irritated with that guy, and I'm really trying to work on it, and so on. And it's very inspiring to hear that, actually. So much more inspiring than someone talking about how much insight they have, which is actually pretty boring, to be honest. So we're not trying to be a guru. We're not trying to know everything. Yeah, we're simply trying to give ourselves as fully as we can to our practice. Yeah, and that will communicate something to others. Okay, so the next thing then about exemplification is that what we ultimately exemplify, what we exemplify really is ourselves. At the end of the day, what we communicate is ourselves. And in a way, a lot of exemplification is simply about openness. It's simply about being open and honest and connecting with people. And we try and do this without kind of falling into the extremes that can go along with openness. So one extreme, or that can counter openness rather. So one extreme is a kind of extreme self-negativity, where we don't feel like we can be open because we've nothing worth being open about, or that people won't like us if we are open. And on the other hand, one of the things that can counter being truly open is intense egotism. So thinking that we're really, really brilliant, much more self-inflated than we warrant. Yeah. I'll come back to these a bit more in a few minutes, but in terms of openness, I think it's important to know how situations where we can be open and situations which spark off tendencies in us where we won't be open, how we'll behave in certain situations. I was quite struck by someone recently on the internet. He wasn't a Buddhist. He was talking about personality tests. And he made the rather wry comment that if you give me a personality test when I'm hungry, and then another one when I'm full after eating, you'll get two completely different personas. Yeah, I thought that was pretty funny, actually. So I think it's worth knowing the kind of situations where certain tendencies get activated that prevent openness. In some situations, we might be quite vain, and in other situations, we might have quite a poor self-view. And they're usually linked anyway. I think egotism is usually a compensation for some inner lack. But the Dharma doorway, anyway, to openness, which goes beyond both of these extremes. Well, there's two of them really. One of them is to go for refuge, just authentically go for refuge, just to really put your sense of worth in the three jewels rather than in the self. Yeah, because genuine confidence can only come from something beyond the self. Yeah, there's loads more that could be said there, but I'm going to move on. And then the other Dharma doorway, and this is more relevant here, is simply openness, being really, really open with our spiritual friends. And remaining open about our practice is a huge part of samanarthata. It's a huge part of exemplification. In fact, one of the hallmarks of a stream entrance, someone who has gained deep and irreversible insight, is a radical and complete openness. Obviously with appropriateness, but they will not hold anything back if it's possible to just deeply share, and they will openly practice and live out the Dharma. So we need to be open. We need to share ourselves with others. Spiritual friends offer us this, and our spiritual friends help us to go beyond egotism, status, self-hatred, and so on, and just be really, really open. So we need to practice openness with our spiritual friends and seek out opportunities where we can just be ourselves without status and relate to people simply on the basis of our going for refuge. I wanted to share a little story here, and this is an interaction, a very good interaction I had with Jyotika one time. You might remember this, but back in the day, I think it was before I was ordained, so it's probably the early 2000s. There was a really lovely woman who used to come along to the center, and she was quite a colorful character. I haven't seen her now in about 15 years, I think, but she was quite psychic, and she had this gift that if you said a word to her, she kind of close her eyes and just spontaneously utter a poem about that word. I don't know if you remember her, Jyotika, but she came up to you one day and she goes, "I can see your soul, and you have a very old soul. I can see your energy, and you have a very, very wise and old soul. And I kind of thought, oh, finally, someone's recognizing this, you know? And maybe I was ordained because I think, I can't remember anyway, but I was chatting to Jyotika then, or I was chatting with Jyotika and some others, and Jyotika was telling me about this woman who came up to him in the center and said, yeah, that he had a really old soul, really wise old soul. And I thought, she's probably saying this to everyone. And it was just really, really good. I think it was a really good counter to the kind of egotism that blocks openness. I wasn't the one saying that. I think it was Jyotika's maturity that he was able to just bring this in as something to, you know, kind of flattering, but not really true, you know. At least that's the sense I got from you, Jyotika. Maybe you believe it. I don't know. You can correct me in the comments. But it was a really good interaction for me because I realized, this is why spiritual friendship is really important, because I probably would have at some level believed in that. But once Jyotika kind of held it up as a kind of a thing not to take too seriously, I realized I had to do that as well. I couldn't take that too seriously, even if it was true, which it is. Anyways, no. I'll leave that one there. So in the spiritual community, we're not relating to each other on the basis of status, you know, and we need really close friends that we can be fully open with. So if we don't have these kinds of friendships, I think we need to seek them out. The people who we can be really open with. And to be honest, until I came across the Dharma, I don't think I had those friends. I had friendships and buddies and so on. But until when I joined a study group and started getting more involved in the Buddhist Center, I don't think I had those kinds of friendships where I could be really fully open. And friendship is the key to true exemplification. If you're without friendship, it's all too easy just to slip into a show, you know, portraying yourself in a certain kind of way. So we need peers who we can connect with. And we also need people who are a bit further on the path to help us when we need help. So both are necessary. And it's not even that our spiritual friends will challenge us explicitly, though they might. It's simply connecting tends to help all these, well, it tends to encourage openness, and it tends to break through whatever prevents openness. And it's important to remember that our practice shows anyway. If our practice is negativity, that will show. If our practice is, if we're experiencing inspiration in the Dharma, that will show. And if we're with genuinely practicing spiritual friends, we will exemplify and inspire each other. That's just how it is. And what's more, that will spill out into all our other interactions as well. So connection and openness is the key to a deeper kind of exemplification. And perhaps one of the strongest experiences of this for me was being on the center team right throughout once we've moved into the new center actually and got settled there, particularly in the 2010s, it was myself, Pavra, Nyanadara, and Pranagita working together very, very closely. And I think we just had, it was just a very, very creative time actually. I mean, the center team is still very creative. It's been a bit more difficult with COVID and being online and everything, but that was a particularly creative time. And I think that spilled out into the wider Sangha then. And the center really, really did grow rapidly in that time. Okay, so the other thing then about exemplification is that in a way, it's a no practice. It's as a practice, it's a no practice. And what I mean by that is that exemplification is not a practice that we can deliberately set out to do. We can't deliberately set out to try and inspire others. The main focus is on making sure that we do our practice, particularly when we're with other people. We can't seek to inspire people. It's much better to think in terms of connecting with people. And what we can see it as, and how I think the best image for what happens is a kind of a perfuming of an atmosphere. Yeah, a perfuming of an atmosphere, the fragrance of the Dharma life arising, yeah, between us as we practice authentically together. So fragrance as an image for the Dharma life is well used in the Buddhist tradition. It's quite common actually, this idea of the fragrance of the Dharma life. In the Buddhist time, you had the Ganda Kuti, which was literally means the perfumed chamber. And this was the chamber where the Buddha dwelt. And later on, it became a chamber in a monastery where an image of the Buddha was kept. And often there would be a special cell, you know, a living cell kept for the Buddha, even after the Buddha had passed. And in this would be the perfumed chamber, perfumed by enlightenment, by the perfect life. In the Vimalakirti Nirdesha, which is where a lot of our references in Triratna for the Samgrahavastus come from, there's also, from a world system far away, the Buddha accumulation of fragrances. That's his name, the Buddha accumulation of fragrances, who communicates the Dharma through fragrance, through different fragrances. He communicates the Dharma. And in the White Lotus Sutra, the Dharma is described as being an excellent medicine. And the White Lotus Sutra says, this excellent medicine is perfect in color, fragrance, and flavor. Take it, and you will quickly be rid of your suffering and agony and be free from illness. And in our threefold puja, we have, in Triratna, we have, I think it's the closing lines of the puja, the fragrance of the perfect life, sweeter than incense, spreads in all directions throughout the world. The fragrance of the perfect life, sweeter than incense, spreads in all directions throughout the world. So the fragrance is there, it's present. It's very hard to pin down fragrance, and a small amount of it can have a big effect in a place. And it's very subtle, but can have a big effect on us. So exemplification isn't a deliberate practice we do. It happens when we come together and an atmosphere is perfumed with the fragrance of the Dharma life. Yeah. And at the end of the day, the Sangha and the Dharma is caught, not taught. Yeah, it's caught, not taught. We catch it. It's not taught to us. We learn it through seeing it. Yeah. And in a way, we have to see it for it to be real. For me, one of the things that was most attractive about the Dharma and the Sangha in my early days was the teachings were inspiring, but really it was seeing particularly order members, the order members Karnadaka and Ratnabandhu, who are two of the mainstays in the Buddhist center at the time, interacting with each other and the quality of their friendship and communication. That was what really attracted me. And that's what drew me to the Dharma. And our actions shout aloud. Our actions shout. Our words often whisper, and our actions shout. So it's our actions that communicate ourselves much, much more than what we say. And again, this is why exemplification is a Samgrahavastus. On the Guhiloka course, for example, I was on, we were living in a mountain valley, living in a small hut, a stone hut. Very, very basic conditions, outdoor taps only, very little electricity, very little heating, compost loos, and just living basically outdoors all the time, and no internet, no social media, and all of those kinds of things. And it was a very basic life, very, very free and very, very simple, but also quite challenging as well. And because there was very, very little to distract yourself with, and very, very little to do except be in the valley, And nobody complained at all. It was a very harmonious course, and we all felt like we supported each other. And there would be days when you would find it a bit more challenging and days when you'd find it more inspiring. And the days that you found it challenging, we all found it challenging from time to time, I think. I think it was just being together and seeing our brothers living out the Dharma life that made me and made each of us want to do better again then, and really re-engage with it again and again. So in a way, we were exemplifying for one another. As the Sutra of Golden Light says, we were creating light for one another. So Sangha is this creating light for one another. And again, that is the quality of exemplification. Okay, so I want to mention a few things that stop or prevent openness and exemplification. So the first one is simply being muddled, not being clear about the ideal, not being clear about what our life is about in the Dharma, not being clear what the Dharma is, or not having a clear sense of the goal. You don't feel like making much effort because you have no response to the goal. You don't think clearly. Or it's caught up in the middle of lots of other things, particularly worldly things. And the main thing we need to do here, if we're muddled, is to get on retreat, be with spiritual friends and discuss the Dharma more, do Dharma study, whether on your own or with other people, and just rouse your energies and get really clear. And I think being on retreat is one of the best ways of curing being muddled. Yeah. Now, I'm just going to mention these briefly because time is moving on. Cynicism is another counter to exemplification. So cynicism, you could say, is a definite aversion to higher value or ethics. Yeah, it's a nihilistic denial of value, laughing at any idealism. You might espouse false values like greed is good. Everyone is out for themselves, really. It's a mug's game. If you're honest and open with people, they'll walk all over you. So that's the kind of cynicism that's very corrosive to exemplification. And hopefully, when you come across Buddhism, or as you get more involved in Buddhism, you're much more likely to be free of this kind of cynicism. But it does linger as well. There's the fear of being mocked or rejected. If we do wear our Dharma practice on our sleeves, if we have an open heart, we fear being open in case someone slags us or teases us or runs us down. And Yanadara talked about this already a couple of days ago, the tall poppy syndrome, we call it. And I'll just tell a couple of short stories, so very brief stories. In Gohiloka, we were all eating at these tables outdoors every day under a sort of a canopy. And there was one day when someone started coughing and they sounded like they were choking a bit at the dinner table. And we all just kind of looked at each other. And Satyaraja, who's a very remarkable man, he's been ordained since I think the 1980s, very impressive Dharma practitioner, just immediately jumped up and went to him to see if he needed a hand to, slap on his back or something like that. And the guy was fine, actually. And I was just struck by how immediate his response was. And I was asking myself afterwards, why didn't I jump up? Not that I wanted to be a savior or anything. It was more like, so what is it about him that he just jumped up so immediately and responded so quickly? And it didn't occur to me in some ways to do it. And I think actually I have a fear of being seen to overreact to things or being laughed at, actually. And I was thinking afterwards, I'd like to be the kind of person who just immediately responds in that way to what's there, regardless of what people think if I get it wrong, Another example, and some of you will have heard me give this example before, but this was really striking. In my early days of working for the center, Karnadaka and I would go for walks. He used to work with me at the time. And whenever he came across a bicycle that had fallen down at a lamppost, he would always stop and pick it up, because that's what he would like other people to do for his bike if he had locked his bike. And the way you always see bikes kind of falling down and blocking paths and stuff. So this would happen quite a bit. And I was really embarrassed by him at first. I thought, oh, don't do that. And I think what it was a residual cynicism and fear of being slagged, because in college I was with some pretty cynical people who would tease you if you're idealistic. But after seeing that a couple of times, I realized, no, that's really good, actually. And I started doing it as well. And I think we need an example sometimes from someone else of what an ethical life looks like, and that allows us then to be ethical. Yeah, that allows us to actually also say, no, this is important. And it's not just about bikes, obviously. I think it's true of the whole of the Dharma life. We do need an example from other people sometimes, and their example of positivity allows us to act positively as well. We're much more social than we think we are, in terms of we take our lead so much more from people around us than we think. We like to think we're completely free individuals, but actually we're very, very deeply influenced by the people around us, which is why spiritual friendships are so important again. There's also the obstacle of being negative towards ourselves. I won't say much about that because it's already been talked about a bit. The other example is, the other obstacle is perfectionism. So you could call this perhaps the near enemy of exemplification. We can live under the tyranny of perfection. Again, this might be something temperamentally you're subject to or not, actually. But we feel like, we need to exemplify perfection. And modern life very much demands perfection of us. We're constantly told how to dress, how to look, what the shape of our bodies should look like, the kind of views we should hold. And again, we're told that if we're not perfect, we're failing at life somehow. And this is a real hindrance to genuine exemplification and connection. I think, again, being open about ourselves in our highs and our lows is the antidote to that. Being open is a radical and challenging practice. Yeah, being open is a radical and challenging practice. Okay, I'll keep going then. There's one or two other things I could say there, but I think I'm going to skip on just because of time. So these are just a few things which block exemplification, especially exemplification as openness and connection. And faith or confidence in the Dharma is really important. Really, that's what we're communicating. Faith or confidence in the Dharma. Sorry, there's banging happening. And again, faith and confidence in the Dharma has a very social dimension. If we're in an environment pervaded and permeated by Dharma practice, shared with others, we can share ourselves more fully. And even if we don't feel confidence. Anyways, faith or confidence in the Dharma has a social dimension. If we're in an environment permeated by Dharma practice, we can have that ourselves, we can share that ourselves. And even if we don't feel confidence in ourselves, in our Dharma practice, we can be lifted by other people who have that confidence. And then if we're in an environment which is permeated by cynicism, by lack of confidence, that will tend to be what we take on as well. So again, this is why Sangha is really important, and spiritual friendships are really important, and why retreats are really important. So we're around other people who have confidence in the Dharma and who exemplify that for us, and we can embody that. So there was a whole thing I wanted to say as well about the lineage of responsibility. So often, I'll just mention it briefly because of time. Another way of exemplifying the Dharma life is to put yourself in situations where you have to embody the Dharma life fully. So where other people depend upon you being in good Dharmic health, so to speak. For example, you support a Buddhism course and you host a breakout room or something like that. And people are looking to you to respond to their questions about the Dharma. And, it's not that you have to know everything and be able to communicate the Dharma deeply, but you have to really be engaging with the Dharma. And I find that's why I tend to say yes to things if I can, because, saying yes to this talk, for example, I've come to a much deeper understanding of exemplification than I would have if I hadn't given this talk. It forces me to look at exemplification much more deeply if I have to talk about it on this retreat. So I'd really encourage you to seek out situations where you're required to be at your best. You're required to really have a deep engagement with your Dharma practice. Going to a study group, coming to events in the center, supporting events in the center, so that you do have to have something to say, so to speak. And again, it's fine to admit you don't know things. In fact, it can be quite inspiring to hear people just being really honest and open about how, yes, it is a struggle at times, Dharma, Because fundamentally, the state of unenlightenment is a state of laziness. Yeah, it's a state of laziness. So we need something to force us to practice more deeply than we would otherwise. And, this is what we call the lineage of responsibility, taking responsibility, throwing yourself into projects in Triratna, for example. And I've benefited from this tremendously down through the years through giving myself to the center as much as I can. Then nearly the last area that I want to talk about, nearly finished, is about exemplification and empathy. So, if we connect like this and we're open about our practice, if we're really, really practicing and we're really open about our practice, it's easy for other people to identify with us. They can kind of empathize with our practice. And if we, this is in contrast to, on the other hand, being full of ourselves, or making claims, or trying to portray ourselves in a particular way, people will find that actually very difficult to empathize with. So exemplification allows others to empathize with you in your Dharma life. Yeah, if we're really open, if we really communicate the Dharma, talk about our Dharma life, people can empathize with our Dharma lives. And if we empathize with other people, if we see them as fundamentally being the same as us, if we see them as being like us, struggling with life, really trying to live a meaningful life, having the dukkha of having a body, having the dukkha, the suffering of having a self, if we can really empathize with other people, we will meet them appropriately and deeply. Yeah, we will meet them appropriately and deeply. And Subhuti, who's a senior order member, talks about this, that what is implied really in Samanartha is a combination of exemplification and empathy, a combination of exemplification and empathy. In fact, they're kind of like the same thing. Fundamentally, they come from the same source. They're deeply linked. And what empathy is really is being in tune with other people and identifying with them as people who want happiness and want to avoid pain just like us. Yeah, especially when we're given that we're all subject to the same suffering that is unenlightenment. So empathy is a core part of exemplification. If we're not sure what exemplification means, think in terms of empathy, connection. So then, just to finish up, what is life most fundamentally about? What is life most fundamentally about? I believe it's about enlightenment. It's about growing spiritually, dharmically, whatever word you want to use. It's about developing more and more positive qualities so that we can be of the deepest service to all beings. And ultimately, it's about going beyond all self-reference so that experience is just a deep flow of creativity and altruism. And I think that that's the deepest purpose available in the universe. That's the deepest meaning of life. And at my best, that's what I try and live by. That's what I try and have shining through all my activities. And of course, I fail, I drift away from it, and then I reconnect with it, and then I'm inspired by it again, and then I drift away again, and then friends pull me up, and then I get back on the path, and then I fall off it again. And it's inspiring, it's humiliating, it's challenging, it's uplifting, and it's of the deepest possible meaning. And I think the ultimate exemplification that we can do is to be in touch with this deepest meaning of the universe and live our lives as much as possible by that, by going ultimately beyond all self-reference, so that experience again is just a flow of creativity and altruism. And we have a vision of life far beyond the ego and far beyond self-reference, and surrendering to this more and more. And when we're in touch with this kind of vision, and I think we can be in touch with this vision at any level of experience, even if we haven't fully realized it, we cannot but communicate this to others. Yeah. So exemplification ultimately is a communication of the transcendental in us and between us. It's a communication of this. It's this being activated within us, between us, and allowing it to shine and sparking that off with all other beings. So that's all I want to say. So I'll suggest a few things we could talk about in the groups if you want. So you might like to see if there's any particular example, anything particular from those examples of the Buddha's life that were striking or that you want to discuss. The Buddha being the ultimate exemplar. And then in terms of ourselves, if exemplification is a no practice, what does it mean for us? How can we, what does the Samanartha as a Samgrahavastus mean in our lives? What might it look like? Do we fall into any of the things that are not exemplification? And how can we know ourselves better in these areas? Can we be more open about with our spiritual friends in our Dharma life? What prevents openness? And if you have time, you won't have time, but if you have time, you might also like to think, well, where do you want to go next with Samanartha and indeed the other Samgrahavastus as well? Great, so I'll hand back to Barbara. Do you want me to read those out again? Yeah. So was there anything particular about the Buddha's life, the stories I told that were striking that you want to discuss? If exemplification is a no practice, in that it's not something we can do deliberately as such, what does it mean for us? How can we take on this Samgrahavastus? Do we fall into any of the areas that are not exemplification? And how can we know ourselves better in these areas? Where can we be more open? And where do we go next with the Samgrahavastus, or particularly Samanartha?